Hello and welcome to the Over and Back Classic NBA podcast. I am Jason, and with me as usual is Rich. Hello, Rich.
Hey, how's it going, Jason?
Pretty good. So we have some sad news in the NBA. Earl Watson was fired from the Phoenix Suns after a 0-3 start very early on in the season. Rich, I heard a rumor that you were in the salon when you found this out.
I was, yeah, as I often am, in the salon, and yeah. I tweeted some stuff out, but which does happen a lot when you tweet at a salon. Often it gets, conflated. The things you say in a salon is not the type of stuff you say outside, but sometimes, they do seem like they are the same, and, people can go nuts and run with them on Twitter and various other news sources.
Yeah,
I've wiped all my tweets, so you can't find them now, and thankfully nobody screenshot them. I hope not, but, it happens, so.
Yeah, and a salon is a good place to get gossip and to get news. So you may have been doing your Earl Watson investigation in the salon.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. I'm often thinking about Earl Watson, and it happened to be on a perfect day because he got, he ended up getting canned on that day. So it was perfect.
Yeah.
That I was doing my normal.
Just a coincidence. Yeah.
My normal.
Yeah.
My weekly Earl Watson Wikipedia scrubbing.
Sure. Your Earl Watson investigation, as we are, of course, planning an in-depth Earl Watson career retrospective project, a summer project for this podcast, obviously. So, we kind of just announced that now. We probably should have saved that for something more dramatic later. But I guess we're letting people know now.
Right. No, I can't wait to break down those Grizzlies years or year.
Oh yeah,
right. Really get into those. You got late Seattle in there too. You got a little bit of Supersonics. We can wrap it around and talk about the end of the Supersonics.
Play for the Pacers too, I believe.
Yeah, probably.
I think so.
I don't know yet.
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
Obviously, we haven't researched it in deep depth yet, but it sounds like you're slacking a little bit on there. I thought you had that kind of covered, Rich. I'm a little disappointed. Now,
2009 to 2010, he played for the Indiana Pacers, of course.
Yeah, I felt like that was the thing.
That?
Yeah,
right.
Jazz. I think he played for the Jazz. Yeah,
he played for the Jazz. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
do you want to keep going? So, you got it. You're on a good roll here.
The only things that I did not remember the Grizzlies. I did remember I remember the Sonics and Thunder and Jazz and Pacers. That's all I can recall immediately.
Yeah, there's a Portland year apparently, 2013, 2014. I don't think that actually happened, but apparently.
Okay.
Well, here's the reason why. He had 24 games played and he scored 0.5 points per game. So didn't really do much. Shot at 1,000% from free throw. So I don't know why that's not in the history books at all. I imagine he hit the threshold there with those games. So I don't know why. I don't know why we don't talk about it.
That would be a record, I would say. So yeah,
that's perfect free throw here.
Yeah, NBA history made. So anyway, we're going to hold off on the Earl Watson talk. I know we're very excited to share all that we know about Earl Watson,
right.
but
it's fine. It's okay.
Yeah, we're going to instead look at some of the other shortest stints for an NBA coach. We're going to look at it a couple of different perspectives. We're going to look at the quickest firing within a season, and we're going to also look at the shortest coaching stints overall. So they're hired at the beginning of the season, and they're fired sometime in the season. We're not going to count interim situations, of course. It's kind of a different can of worms. There is actually one exception to that, which we'll get to, which is notable and worth talking about. But for the rest of the time, we're just basically going to talk about guys who were hired. They thought they were going to be not permanent coaches, but long-term coaches, and didn't work out so well. So
yeah, and particularly in Watson's case, a guy who has been there for now, a year plus or whatever, but gets only 3 games in the season. And we'll talk about it a little bit. The earliest within seasons are pretty fun because you would think, 3 games, geez, that's not a lot of time. And it's like, you know what? Like, it's not. There's been worse, and we're going to talk about them here in a little bit. But it's kind of surprising how quickly some of these guys get the axe, and even less than 10 is still seems shocking. The 3, going 0-3 and getting jettisoned seems like a big shock to the system. But there are a few other ones here that are pretty fun, and guys that had success the year prior, and then this year they go 0-5 or 0-6 or whatever, and they're jettisoned or whatever. So it's a pretty fun pats down history here that we're going to go through.
Yeah, absolutely. So the number one shortest amount of time, the earliest that a coach was fired, was the great Dolph Schayes. For the 1972 Buffalo Braves, they were 0-1, only one game in the season. It was a season-opening 123-90 loss to Seattle at home at the beginning of the franchise's second season. Schayes had coached the Braves in their first season in 71, in which they went 22-60. Their best players were Bob Kaufman, who went from 1 year from 4.3 points per game to 20.4 points per game. So quite an increase there. Was actually a 3-time All-Star, so pretty good player. Yeah. Don May, who went from 2.6 points per game to 20.2 points per game, back to 7.9 points per game the next season. And the rest of the roster was not much to speak of. So probably about as good as you could have expected in that first season.
Yeah, that's. I mean, it's just the remarkable things, and you see that all the time during the NBA. And I used to play a lot of fantasy basketball. I don't so much anymore, but there was always guys that you would look at, and when you're doing fantasy drafts, guys because the idea is that somebody has to score on a team, and that's like these guys, like Don May and a Bob Kaufman or whatever, guys that have just insane increases in that season. Kaufman was able to kind of sustain it a little bit. Don May, obviously, he goes from 2.6 to 20, which is good. I mean, at least that's fun. But then he goes back down to 7.9. You kind of see that weird. Sometimes it just happens where like somebody has to score on a team. Like it seems like a basketball team, no matter what, is going to get to that 80, 90 points or whatever. And no matter what roster you put together, somebody has to do that or whatever. But yeah, not much of a roster, but yeah, not bad. I mean, a okay run there, but yeah, it was short lived, unfortunately, for the Braves.
Yeah, and that was a year where there were 3 expansion teams.
Right.
So yeah, there's a lot of upheaval in the league, and obviously you're spreading. You're going from I think 12 to 15 teams or something close to that. I forget the exact number offhand, but anyway, in that range. So you're spreading a lot of talent. There's the ABA as well, taking a lot of competition. So you're suddenly having guys who are in very different roles, of very different skill levels, and it's obviously affecting the way that the league. Even though there was a lot of talent to go around, you're still obviously thinning things out to a degree. Although Kaufman obviously stepped up and was a pretty good player for a few years. Actually, his career ended early. Otherwise he might have had like more of a might be a little better remembered, but at least in Braves history was a decent player. Anyway, back to the Dolph Schayes and the reason for the firing after that loss to Seattle, 33-point loss. The team's owner, Paul Snyder, said that I was a little disappointed by last year, or I wasn't a little disappointed by last year. I was a lot disappointed. I'm used to running a business, and I felt it was the right decision to let Dolph go, so I did it. After the way we played in the first game, I felt like I would rather sell the franchise than watch another performance like that. And so not obviously a little bit upset there. For Schayes, it was the end of his coaching career, which was not the best coaching career. He was, of course, one of the all-time great players as a power forward for the Syracuse Nationals, but he did transition into coaching with the 76ers in 64. They had some okay years, but he had some personality conflicts with Wilt Chamberlain when he joined the team, and he was fired after their playoff loss to the Celtics in 1966. The Sixers won the title next year with Alex Hannum. He was kind of considered a little too nice. Also had some critical comments about Wilt before he ended up coaching him that Wilt really never particularly cared for. So anyway, so he came back to the Braves. Things didn't work out so well. His replacement was Johnny McCarthy, who was a scout who had played for Canisius College in Buffalo and also in the NBA for the Royals, Hawks, and Celtics. And Snyder had another quote after the game, which I believe was actually before Schayes was fired, but the quote was, "I'll tell you this, we'll never look this bad again, not ever, and you can count on that." Well, the Braves actually...
right. Eddie was right.
Yes.
Paul Snyder.
Yes.
Nostradamus.
Yes, the Braves actually did have 5 other 30-point-plus losses that year, but... in fairness, they were all on the road, so the home fans did not have to see that ever again.
So you always play better in front of the home crowd.
He meant it at home, yeah. So they actually did better with. They had an 8-11 record at one point, but things fell apart pretty quickly, and they had an identical 22-60 record in their second season. McCarthy was fired after that season, never coached again. The Braves, however, would hire Jack Ramsay the next season. Would draft Bob McAdoo and Ernie DiGregorio, and were a pretty good team by the mid-70s before various issues involving money and such would break up the team, lead to Snyder selling the franchise, and eventually them moving to San Diego. We've documented those in previous episodes.
Yeah, seems odd that the Clippers/Braves would have an owner that was kind of out of his mind and not
I know
person, but
yeah,
they've really gotten a good draw here. Like when Steve Ballmer is like oh my god, this guy is so much. This is like the best owner we've ever had. Like far and away, it's probably not a great history, but yeah, it's a long lineage there. That franchise in particular has just had a lot. I mean, it seemed like there for, as you mentioned, the Ramsay era, there was a little bit there where they had kind of put some stuff together, but man, it's been a rough go for quite a while for that entire franchise.
Yes, perhaps things will pick up for the Clippers. You never know. One of these days, it's gonna,
Right?
Clippers gonna shine at some point. Yeah. So, joining Earl Watson in the 0-3 club is Chick Reiser of the 1953 Baltimore Bullets. Just very briefly on Chick, since there honestly wasn't a whole lot on Chick to research. He had coached the team to an 8-19 record to end the 52 season. And then was fired after the 0-3 start in the 53 season. So he had 30 games overall as coach of the Bullets, and he had played for various franchises in the 40s and in the 50s, including playing for the Bullets BAA championship in 1948. It's worth noting that this Bullets is not linked to the current Bullets Wizards franchise. This franchise folded in 54, and then the current franchise formed first in Chicago and then eventually moved to Baltimore, and then, of course, to Washington in the 70s. So for those who care about that, which I would imagine is a relatively low number of people, that is why you do not consider this Bullets part of the current Bullets.
Yes, and then another guy, moving on to the next little bit here of the lineage of quick little firings here. Mike Brown in 2013 goes 1-4 with the Los Angeles Lakers. Famously that offseason they had grabbed Steve Nash and Dwight Howard, and they had joined Kobe Bryant and Paul Gasol, and it was going to be a whole lot of fun until it wasn't fun at all, and they went 1-4, and then it stopped being fun ever again. And it was never ever fun. Even though it was supposed to be fun, it was never fun. It was really,
it was not fun.
Bad.
It was not really fun for anybody. Yeah, Nash got hurt pretty much right away. Dwight Howard had a back injury.
Kobe was kind of off the deep end a little bit at that point too. He'd kind of gone nuts a little.
Yeah. He was playing really well that year. I mean, they like wore him out. Of course, he had the Achilles injury, which basically ended his really being good part of his career. Chemistry with Mike D'Antoni wasn't great. They had they were going to bring Phil Jackson in and didn't bring him in, and so on and so forth. I think we've documented this before, but and it's recent enough that most of our listeners, I think, know it reasonably thoroughly. But yeah, not a great situation for Mike Brown, but he's doing well. He's an assistant for the Warriors now. Interim coach here and there. So
got himself a ring a few days ago. So he's doing well.
Yeah,
finally,
nice.
Maybe assistant's the better role for Mike Brown. He seems to do
maybe
better than that, so.
Right. Yeah, maybe,
but he did a great job last year with the Warriors. I mean, it's an easy thing. You can kind of turn the key and let it go. But hey, it's something to be said for that. The whole thing didn't explode without Steve Kerr or whatever. So hey,
sure, yeah, good for Mike.
But as you mentioned, real quickly, that Bernie Bickerstaff, he was the interim head coach for a while.
Oh, that's right. I forgot. It was like 5 games or something.
Yeah, I think he got just a handful, maybe 4 or 5 games or whatever. And then they hired Mike D'Antoni on November 12th. And that also wasn't very much fun. So it seemed like it should have been fun. But again, it wasn't fun, even though it was all supposed to be fun. But it wasn't.
Yeah, and he was recovering from like some sort of surgery, and was like, everyone had like a weird thing going on that year. It was just kind of a snake bitten situation. Yeah.
2013 at Los Angeles Lakers, not fun at all.
No.
Yeah. Now we move on to Gene Shue, 2-4 for the 1978 Philadelphia 76ers, and then he is gone. So we'll get a little bit of background here. He had took over the 76ers in 1973. That was a year after they had set the NBA record for futility. They're going 9-73. I think, win percentage-wise, the Bobcats from a few years ago beat them, but they still have the lowest win total, right, of a year?
Well, actually, the Bobcats do have the lowest win total because it was the lockout season. But,
that's it. Yeah.
But yes, over a full season, yes, the Bobcats were actually worse. In terms of percentage. So
either way,
yeah, still really bad.
Yeah,
not good. Yeah.
Still terrible. But
right.
Yeah, this is a quote that I found in an article. He says, "No one cared about the team then. Nobody covered it." So it was old school 76ers basketball there. Nobody cared and nobody covered it. But under Shue, they improved to 25 wins in his first season. And by year 4, they were in the Eastern Conference champions. They, bringing on, Julius Erving in 1976 sure helped, but they had a pretty decent offense too. George McGinnis in there. And Shue really understood that he had, 2 great players, and a lot of the offense and a lot of the success revolved around just giving those guys the ball as much as possible, giving Julius Erving in his prime the ball, and George McGinnis as well, going one-on-one against defenders. They were both great players that could get to the basket and score almost at will. So Shue made a good idea of hey, let's give these guys the ball a lot. And you saw a big turnaround once Julius came there, and that kind of set the stage for what would happen then. And then they made the NBA Finals, as mentioned. In that year 4, they lost to Bill Walton in the breaks of the game Portland Trailblazers in 6 games. But then he comes back the next year and he says, goes 2-4, and then he gets fired. A lot of quotes though about this, and it was kind of fun to kind of read a little bit about this, and similar to some people that we're going to talk about before. I mean, obviously Schayes was one. You know, after one game he was sent away, but Shue was kind of similar as well in that same sense, where him and his owner never really seemed to see eye to eye. Shue, after he was fired, said obviously I wasn't fired for basketball reasons. A lot of other things were going on. It's really hard to nail down the exact reason why. Nobody really says this is why he was fired, but there's an SI Vault article from 1977 that says Sixers owner Fitz Dixon whispered to a Philadelphia newspaper that he might fire Shue. That was on November 1st. And then the writer, I forgot. Damn, I wish I had the writer here. Goes really in on Dixon. I don't know much about. Do you know much about Fitz? Because this guy goes in.
Yeah. The writer was Curry Kirkpatrick, by the way, but I don't actually know that much about Fitz Dixon, because he was right before Harold Katz. I think he was after Irv Kozlov. There may have been some in between there, but honestly, I don't know a whole lot about Fitz. He didn't come up during our research on 70s wacky owners, which maybe he should have.
Yeah, he probably should have. Yeah,
yes.
Read this article. Here's a little bit of the quotes from it. For all of his mainline milquetoast manner, Dixon is a power wielder who permits no photographers or vendors to work near him at courtside in the Spectrum and orders guards to keep spectators from passing in front of his front row seat. When two reporters approached him on the night after the big leak, that he was going to fire Shue, Dixon instructed a member of the personal security force to boot them out, which they did. Later that evening, after watching the Chicago Bulls beat his dead-in-the-water team, Dixon decided to fire Shue. So some other, thoughts in this SI Vault article. Apart from the lack of communication with the team, Shue's biggest shortcoming was his inability to get along with the owner. After one defeat last year, Dixon embarrassed Shue in front of the press by railing at him, "Well, I've been waiting for your excuses," after which Shue referred to Dixon as that son of a bitch. So it did not go very well. Dixon also did not like Shue's lifestyle, his off-the-court acquaintances, and especially his refusal to kiss Dixon's feet as everybody else in the organization did.
So when I got a chance to interview Julius Erving in his book, like the one guy that he is like somewhat critical, and of course he's really nice and doesn't really rip on people even if he disagrees with them, but the one guy who he was kind of a little bit disparaging about was Gene Shue, and thinking like just Gene didn't really have it as a tactical coach to keep up with Jack Ramsay, and didn't really enjoy playing with him. And I get the sense that it was similar to the first year with the Heat, where there was a lot of kind of fit issues with Wade and LeBron, even though they enjoyed playing together, and it was kind of like a two stars trying to kind of figure out the same thing. And a little bit was the same thing with Irving and McGinnis before McGinnis was eventually kind of sidelined and then eventually traded, and they really formed the team around Doc. And I think also that Cunningham was the golden boy in Philly, and they were kind of there were forces wanting to groom him to be the next coach. And I think Shue later was not thrilled with the way that had gone down, and it felt like Cunningham may have been part of ousting him, but or at least it certainly wasn't. He was actually publicly critical about the idea that the style of play they were playing and so forth.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, it worked out pretty well for Philadelphia after they got rid of Shue. They hired Billy Cunningham, of course, Philly legend. They went 53-23 under him. They lost in the Eastern Conference Finals to the Washington Bullets. But Cunningham would stick with the team for a number of years, and then they finally would, of course, win the championship in 1983, as you mentioned, kind of building around Doc and obviously bringing Moses Malone in and all that. But Billy Cunningham, of course, became, in some ways, even more of a Philadelphia legend than he was prior. As far as Gene, other stuff that he did, prior to coaching in Philadelphia, he led the Baltimore Bullets to an NBA Finals appearance in 1971. He was swept by Kareem and the Bucks. And then after Philly, Shue would coach the San Diego Clippers, the Washington Bullets, and then go back to the Clippers when they were in Los Angeles. And that's where he ended his career in 1989 as well. And then he became a scout for the Sixers. And I'm almost positive he still is a scout. As far as I could tell, they still said he was a scout. He's 85 years old, though, so I don't know how much scouting he's doing. But hey, maybe he's still doing it. But it's good to know he's back with the organization, at least in some respects or whatever. But yeah, no, that's kind of the Gene Shue thing. But just kind of, there are often a lot of those coaches where it's like, hey, we need to get over the hump. You get a talented team and you got a guy that's really good, but then, a lot of people can sense that you just need maybe that new coach to kind of come in and get them over. I mean, I look at, the Doug Collins, Bulls, and you need a Phil Jackson to just be the guy that, the team was pretty much made. They just need that next guy to kind of get them right over the hump or whatever. And there's plenty of examples of that happening throughout NBA history, too.
Sure. Obviously, Kerr with the Warriors after Mark Jackson and stuff like that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. All
right, so now we'll move on to the 0-6, 1949. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to transition to you. So.
Oh, okay. There we go. So we got 0-6 here in 1949 with the Fort Wayne Pistons, and it is Carl Bennett. Now, this is a weird one here because this is his only coaching job, and I think, as far as we can tell, officially the shortest non-interim coaching tenure ever. 6 games. That's it. That's all he ever coached. A little bit of background on Carl, because it was kind of hard to find out what exactly was the story here. Obviously, talking about early, professional basketball, 1949, Fort Wayne Pistons, a lot of, just the leagues and what we know as professional basketball is just completely different. But Bennett, as far as I could tell, he was Mr. Everything, is what a lot of people describe him as, for the Zollner Pistons basketball and softball teams of the late 40s and late 50s, or the 50s. Pistons owner Fred Zollner spotted Bennett playing first base for the Fairview Nurseries team in the Fort Wayne Fastpitch Softball League, and hired him in 1939 to coach the Pistons basketball team in the YMCA Industrial League. As we said, very different times here. Then Bennett is listed as the Pistons' first coach in the pro leagues, as Fort Wayne started in the 1948-49 season in the BBA. So that's as far as we know. So either he was just kind of a friend of Fred Zollner, I guess, and a guy that he liked him coaching baseball, and then decided, coach basketball too, I guess. Yeah, it's very strange.
Yeah, because the Pistons before then had been in the NBL, and they went over to the BAA in the 49 season. Yeah, obviously we're gonna have a couple other examples of just like really weird connections between other leagues, and it gives you obviously the idea of very much a small town amateurish feel for professional basketball in the 40s, and really into the late 50s, early 60s, before there's before the NBA's in big cities and kind of has more of a major league feel than it certainly did during that time. But yes, obviously when you find your coach in the Fort Wayne Fast Pitch Softball League, that stands out. Yes,
that gives me. I mean, I play slow pitch, so I don't know if it's quite the same. But I mean, hey, you never know who's watching. So I'm always gonna always want to give it 110% because you never know if you're gonna be a coaching gig.
Maybe the Suns will be calling you, Rich. They need a coach.
I didn't play last week. Goddamn.
Yeah.
I wanted to get out there.
It's a shame. Yeah.
So as far as Bennett, after 5 games, of course, Bennett gave way to the legendary Curly Armstrong. He's not legendary. He coached only one season in the BAA and then disappeared off the face of the earth. I don't know anything about Curly Armstrong, but and the head coach was a revolving door for the Pistons, as it was for most professional, quote, professional basketball leagues at that time. They finally found stability in the NBA. They had Paul Birch and Charles Ekman were guys that took over there and were there for quite a while until the team started to have some pretty decent success in kind of those early NBA years, but took a little while to get going. Yeah,
they made the 55 and 56 finals. I think Ekman was the coach at that point because he'd been a referee before then. So yeah, they were good for a few years and then really bad for about 30 years.
Yes,
until the late 80s or so. So yes, unfortunately, although they had some decent years in the 70s. I think Curtis Harris lectured me for overlooking that.
Oh, he did. I remember that. Yeah, that was
in the Connie Hawkins. Yeah. Right, but
the Connie Hawkins
teams. I know that they were kind of good then, but they didn't really do anything. Like they were all right. But anyway, yes. So more about Carl Bennett. Is there anything else that stands out about Mr. Bennett?
So he's actually a pretty famous guy in some respects. Yeah, you might not even know some of these things. So he's famous for being in the room, it was in his house when the BAA and the NBL merged. So this is a quote from NBA.com. It says, one of the most important days in NBA history, and Maurice Pedloff's greatest triumph didn't happen at a swank Midtown hotel, but rather at the modest 2-story Fort Wayne, Indiana home of Carl Bennett. So essentially, NBA president Podloff wanted was to sell Zollner on the benefits of merging the BAA with its rival, the NBL. This was back in 1948, of course. Several cups of coffee and a few hours later, Bennett liked what he had heard and decided to take the proposal to Zollner, he was obviously a big-time businessman and didn't probably want to sit in someone's house and talk about the merging of basketball leagues or whatever. So he had Bennett take the proposal to Fred Zollner or whatever, and Zollner liked it, and the rest is history. The NBA was as we know it, kind of formed. And then another interesting part about Bennett as well, he was front and center at the lowest scoring game in league history, the one that led to the most important rule change in NBA history, the 24-second shot clock. Bennett recalls the 1918 triumph of the Pistons over George Mikan and the Minneapolis Lakers. Then quickly thereafter, they realized, oh God, we better fix this in quickly because it's not going to be good. And so that's kind of cool. Yeah, he was there for obviously the lowest scoring game in history. And then later in his life, and very, very late in his life, he became one of the pioneers of the NBA's D League, the Fort Wayne Mad Ants franchise. He was there for their opening day and gave off the front tip. But yeah, he's essentially in a lot of the articles I read, like the king of Fort Wayne basketball. I mean, he was early there, always doing stuff with the Fort Wayne Pistons, even if it wasn't coaching, working in the front office, working around or whatever. And then, yeah, of course, being a big part of the NBA merger and then being a big part of the Fort Wayne Mad Ants coming together as well. So yeah, for Carl Bennett, pretty decent career there.
Yeah, very interesting. So maybe not the best coaching career, but you look at everything else that he did, pretty important in Fort Wayne and in NBA history. So good stuff there. Thank you for the research.
Yeah, no problem.
Yes. So we'll look at a couple others real quick before we get to Mr. Paul Westphal. Another Pistons one. Earl Lloyd was fired after starting his second season in Detroit, 2-5 for the 73 Pistons, and he is better known as the first black player in NBA history. Actually, played in the first game, not the first assigned, but played in the first game. And it would end up being the second black coach in NBA history and the first non-player coach, because Bill Russell was obviously the first black coach as a player in NBA history. Also was a scout for the Pistons in the 1960s. Jerry Krause, before he died, he was on on the Woj podcast and had some really good stories about himself and Earl Lloyd and Red Holzman, being basically the three scouts that were actually doing the work in the NBA in the mid '60s. That not every team, there were 9 teams, but then not every team had a scout at that point. So they were kind of the ones traveling around, and they kind of helped each other along, even though they were theoretically competing with each other. Just they had a friendship and they were on the road, and it was kind of cool to hear about. I didn't know much about Earl Lloyd's scouting life. I believe there's a documentary coming out on him as well. We did do when he passed away a couple years ago. We did a little bit of we did a short segment on our podcast about his life and his legacy. But there's definitely more to learn there. I'd be interested in kind of digging into him more for sure.
Yeah, I didn't know about the documentary. I'm pretty interested now.
I think it's the first to do it. I think it's called. I'm not sure if it's out yet, but I know it's coming out fairly soon. So that will be that'll be one to check out when we get a chance. Another one, another short-lived coaching stint, 1-6, Roger Potter of the 1950s Tri-Cities Blackhawks. This was his only coaching job, and this was actually during the first NBA season after the merger. He was replaced by a guy, you might have heard of him, Red Auerbach.
No.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Fair enough.
Tri-Cities Blackhawks. That's that's not even a team. That's not.
Yeah. No. It's Tri-Cities. What are the Tri-Cities?
What kind of name is Red either? Yeah. And where are the Tri-Cities? All it's stuff made up. So.
Yeah. The internet has surprisingly little else to say about Roger Potter, so I did not garner much more information about this, but we will have a little bit more about the Blackhawks Hawks franchise and the propensity for changing coaches in just a little bit.
Yes, pretty good there. Now we'll get to Paul Westphal, 2012 Sacramento Kings. He goes 2-5 before he is jettisoned. Didn't have a great career with the Kings. He was 49-112, and famously he feuded with their star DeMarcus Cousins throughout his entire tenure.
Yeah, I'm very surprised that DeMarcus Cousins had a problem with it.
You knew it. I know. Yeah. It is shocking that DeMarcus Cousins would either just not get along with a coach or at some time, it's just strange. That's a model citizen through and through. But yeah, Westphal probably had his own issues as well with the team, and this is from some articles from the time of his firing from ESPN.com. So with the Cousins Westphal spat showing no resolutions, Kings owners Joe and Gavin Maloof decided to take action instead of trading away a promising young big man. They made Westphal the first firing of the lockout shortened season. So this kind of came to a head pretty quickly as well. A few days prior to the firing, Westphal released a statement criticizing Cousins' commitment to the franchise and excused him from the team's game against New Orleans. He also said that Cousins asked for a trade. Cousins' agent said no, he did not. But that's usually doesn't go well when the coach says one thing and his agent and the player says another. So it came to a head, and obviously Westphal was the one that took the fall here. The Kings said we have a lot of respect for Paul and he's a classy individual, but it's time for a change. And that was kind of the end of Paul Westphal in the head coaching roles. He had previously coached the Suns, of course, in the Sonics. He had tremendous success with the Suns. The first year he reached the finals with the Suns, but things soured pretty quickly for him. And by the beginning of the 95-96 season, he was out. Then he succeeded George Karl in Seattle, and then struggled. Or was Bob Hill between them? There was George.
I think
Karl.
Bob Hill was after him.
Was he after? Okay, that's what it was. So he succeeded George Karl then in Seattle. Okay, but then he struggled with that team before as well. He got fired at the beginning of their third season. They made the playoffs a few times, but obviously they were used to success and really wanted that team to be in the running for the Western Conference Championship. And in the late years of Karl, and then of course under Westphal, it just didn't happen. And then this is my favorite fun fact about Paul Westphal, and he bounced around a few times after this too. And I think he's still. I don't know if he's still on an NBA bench as well, but I know he was on Brooklyn's bench a few years ago, I think under Avery Johnson. I don't know what he's doing right now, but this is my favorite fun fact about him, though, is that he served as an assistant coach for a high school team in Arizona for 2 years before he returned to the NBA as coach for the Supersonics for the 1998-99 season. did he get a stipend? Did he just do it as a favor to somebody?
Yeah.
And he's the assistant. That's the best part. It's like, I took like the Suns to the NBA Finals like 4 years ago, and now I have to be the assistant coach for a high school team. Like,
yeah, I probably did it for I don't know. Did he have like a kid on the team?
I don't know. That's why I couldn't find out like what the other details. I just found that out, and I was like, oh, all right, cool. Like, I mean, that's kind of fun. I mean, I'd like to be in high school and be coached by Paul Westphal. Like, hey, how's it going?
He was by the way, he was Lionel Hounds' assistant in
that's
Brooklyn,
okay.
so.
Sorry, yes.
Yeah, there you go.
I got my wrong rotation of Brooklyn Nets coaches.
Yes. So
cycle of bad Brooklyn Nets coaches. I apologize.
Yes. He also coached Pepperdine University. I forgot about that. He coached in college.
Yeah.
So
did Grand Valley State University too. I think that was his first run or whatever in Arizona, because he had been kind of an Arizona guy for a long time, obviously.
Right. Yeah.
And then moved from there, and then went to the Suns and stuff. But no, he seems like a guy. I don't know if he's on a bench anymore, but he's a guy that always pops up. Like, you're just like, oh yeah, that's Paul Westphal. Like, I just remember seeing him on benches all the time. I think he was in Dallas for a year or two. As well, just kind of always. Maybe that's where I thought Avery Johnson. I think maybe it was with Avery Johnson in Dallas. I don't know exactly, but he's always been on NBA benches, one way or another. But yeah, I'm not sure if he is anymore, to be honest.
Yeah, he was a 3-time All NBA first team and 1-time All NBA second team. That's more than
player.
I would have expected for him. Yeah, he didn't quite. I mean, he's not in the Hall of Fame, although he definitely has the case. He didn't. Maybe is a little short on the longevity, but yeah, he was really good. So. Anyway, I was I knew he was really good, but I was surprised at 3 first-team All-NBA.
Yeah,
that's a fairly short number of players who have that many. So anyway, fun times. So we got Jack Ramsay of the '89 Indiana Pacers, started 0-7. Do you want to take this one, or should I take this one?
No, I can grab this one. So
all right, sure.
He took over as coach, of course, from the 86-87 season for the Indiana Pacers. The Pacers were pretty destitute at this point. They really were. I mean, they really were a destitute team ever since they kind of came into the NBA. What we've talked about them a lot as one of the the big time franchises of the ABA, one of the more successful franchises of the ABA. Once you get to the NBA, it really it kind of all soured really quickly. They had a first round playoff exit in 1981. And then after that, they hadn't reached the playoffs, and they really had a tough time even scraping near 500. Ramsay coached them to their second winning record as an NBA team. He got them to 500 and into the playoffs. His first year. The following season, they stumbled a little bit. They fell to 38-44. And the next season, after an 0-7 start, Ramsay resigned as Pacers coach. And it seemed like it was just kind of a thing where he was just like, there wasn't really any hard feelings. It was just kind of, hey, things aren't kind of working out here. It's whatever. And it's Jack Ramsay. So you knew it wasn't going to be like, he's not going to throw a bunch of tables and throw people under the bus. He's a classy man. Dr. Shaq isn't just going to, he's going to go out and with grace or whatever. And that's all he did, really.
Might sweat a lot, but he's not going to,
exactly.
He's not going to get mad. Right. Yeah. Sweat through his shoes, but yes.
Yeah. No. And that, well, referees are exempt. He's a nice guy to people. Referees,
right?
Those guys.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right.
Yeah, right. But other career highlights for Jack, of course. Longtime NBA coach with Philadelphia, Buffalo, and then most notably Portland. He led them to an NBA championship in his first season. I stayed there for 10 years, but could never really replicate the success of that first year. And then after his coaching career, after this Pistons run, he became one of the preeminent voices of the NBA, both on radio and television. One of my favorite commentators of all time, and then sadly passed away from cancer in April 2014. But how did it work out for the Pacers? Not great. In the first year, Mel Daniels, I did not even know this, but Mel Daniels was coaching the Pacers for two games. They lost both, so that didn't go very well. They brought back George Irvine, who was a coach with them throughout the 80s. He came back. He went 6-17, so he didn't really help much either. Then the following season, they went to Dick Versace, who had led them to the playoffs then that next year. Bob Hill took over a few years after that. Then he eventually gave way to Larry Brown, who then guided the Pistons to, back-to-back Eastern Conference Finals and kind of set the stage for their success that they would have for almost really the next decade. Then Larry Brown, of course, would come in, then Rick Carlisle and just continue.
Yeah, Larry Bird after Larry Brown, yeah.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So, yeah, you had a nice little cycle then of years after that. But, yeah,
yes.
I don't know if, I guess Ramsay got him, maybe on the right path a little bit. But, no, definitely, just 0-7. But, yeah, there wasn't any real, hot things of why it had. It just kind of, it wasn't working out. Which,
Dutcher was a little older by then. He was in his 60s. So
I'm sure he had trouble. And that happens with a lot of coaches where it's just like you reach a point where like what worked in 1974 might not work in 1989 with the same players.
Yeah,
so,
or you just don't have the same energy. You don't have the same
exactly. And being an NBA coach is not easy. Yeah, those guys. I mean, they age like incredibly when they're coach. So yeah, it could be a thing where it's like this is stupid. I'm out of here. I'm gonna go to the radio and be great at it. So
yeah. So a few other brief ones. We didn't want to. There's a lot of these. We didn't want to get in depth on all of them, but Sidney Lowe started 0-8 with the 2003 Memphis Grizzlies, resigned, and was replaced by Hubie Brown, 69 years old at the time. Of course, another great coach-turned-announcer. And Hubie actually helped turn things around the next season, giving the Grizzlies their first winning season with Pau Gasol, Jason Williams, James Posey, Mike Miller. They had a nice little run for a few years, although they would continue to get swept in the playoffs in the first round. But regular season-wise, they were a strong team. Finally, some good vibes for that franchise after some really rough years.
Given what had happened in Vancouver, just like making the playoffs was enough for Memphis to, because it had been real bad there for a while. And of course, moving didn't help. It matters either. But it was just getting them into the playoffs was some welcome stability for that franchise.
Yeah, and that was like the first time in like 18 years that Hubie Brown had coached, since the Knicks, I believe, in the mid-'80s.
Right,
so it was weird to go back to him, but it ended up working out, pretty well. Next, Cotton Fitzsimmons started 0-8 for the 97 Phoenix Suns. Fitzsimmons was a long-time coach. I forgot he had 3 stints with the Suns, one in the early 70s, one in the early 90s before Paul Westphal, and then here in the late 90s. Was already a lame duck, decided to resign early after a bad start. Charles Barkley had just been traded in that offseason. The team had a lot of chemistry issues, particularly with Sam Cassell and Robert Horry, who had come from Houston. Fitzsimmons particularly felt undermined by Cassell. They all kind of came to a head when they lost to Vancouver, who would only win 14 games that year. Then under Danny Ainge, they actually fell to 0-13 before they started being turned around. Ainge was just 1 year removed from having stopped playing. This was also the year later on, Horry threw the towel at Danny Ainge after being removed from a game, kind of a famous incident at the time. He was suspended for 2 games, was lectured by Jerry Colangelo, and then traded to the Lakers in a deal involving Cedric Ceballos. Interesting how Horry completely changed around his reputation after that, and obviously had a lot of success with the Lakers and the Spurs. I guess Suns fans do not like Robert Horry for other reasons, but for most franchises, even if you don't like Horry, you would sort of admit he was this clutch kind of responsible guy. But in this case, not so good. But they actually finished 40-42, which, considering their bad start, not too bad. And they took the Sonics to 5 games in the first round in those playoffs. So we're going to compliment Danny Ainge on a job well done. You heard it here first.
Yes, yeah. Jason, breaking news. Jason credits Danny Ainge for something. That's pretty good. You're growing. You're becoming a better person, Jason.
I don't really care for that, but anyway. Mike Farmer started 1-8 for the 1967 Baltimore Bullets. He had played in the NBA for the early 60s, also played 1 year in the ABL, and also played with Bill Russell and Casey Jones at the University of San Francisco, but part of their great championship team. So he had come from the Hawks as chief scout and assistant. This was only his season as a NBA head coach. He was fired. I could not find any particular reason why he was fired other than bad start. So the Bullets finished 20-61, so not really very helpful for them. It took them a couple years to get better once they, of course, got Wes Unseld and other players, Earl Monroe and the other guys that they had Jack Marin already, and a couple of the other guys that eventually would lead them to some decent success. But yeah, they didn't really have any stars yet, so not great for them. We also have Byron Scott, who started 3-6 for the 2010 New Orleans Hornets. They had lost in the first round of the 2009 playoffs, including a playoff game in New Orleans to Denver by 58 points. I forgot about that game. So it was almost fired then. Eventually it was fired after this bad start. The Hornets were kind of in desperation mode with the clock ticking on Chris Paul. They had already traded Tyson Chandler to the Bobcats for Emeka Okafor. And even though, people say the Hornets and Bobcats thing is not confusing, the Hornets trading a player to the Bobcats still a little confusing for me. But regardless, it's not confusing. So, and Andy Phillip, who started a 6-4 with the 59 St. Louis Hawks.
That's good.
I know. Yes, it is good. But as I mentioned earlier, the Blackhawks and the Hawks went through a lot of coaches. Ben Kerner founded the team in Buffalo in 1946, along with Leo Ferris, who was later the Nationals GM, was instrumental in creating the shot clock. Then they moved the team to Moline, Illinois, to become the Tri-Cities Blackhawks. The Tri-Cities are now, I think, widely known as the Quad Cities. And I don't know what the fourth city was, but we don't need to get into that.
It's Davenport, Moline, and then I actually don't know the others.
All right, well, fair enough.
They're in Illinois, but they're basically not Illinois, so I don't actually know. What are the other ones here? I don't know.
I don't know.
I believe is one of them. Bettendorf is one, and then I don't know what the hell the other one. Rock Island. I think it's Rock Island, Davenport, Moline, and Bettendorf. I believe that is true. But
I'm glad we clarified that. The only thing I know about the Quad Cities is Quad City DJs. So,
that's about the extent of my. Yeah. Are they from those Quad Cities? Or are they from
I mean,
another
what
quad city?
other quad cities would there be?
I don't know.
I've
been in that area, and they don't quite. I don't know. They don't seem like they're from that area.
I think we have to drive through that to get to Iowa City, where my wife and family is from.
Does that look like where the Quad City DJs are from? Like,
I mean, I would assume so. Or I mean, that's
no. Okay, I looked it up. They're
name.
from Jacksonville. So you try to figure out why they're called the Quad City DJs.
I
was going to say, no way that much groove and that much incredible musical talent came
well,
from the Quad Cities. Not to besmirch the Quad Cities, but
I mean, Magic. Well, I think we are kind of besmirching the Quad Cities a little bit, but that's going to probably remain a mystery for us unless you have time to research it while I give more tips on Andy Phillip. But 3 years in the NBL before they joined the NBA with the merger in the 1950 season. 2 NBA years in the Tri-Cities, 4 in Milwaukee and 13 in St. Louis before the team was sold and moved to Atlanta. Ben Kerner, known for his impatience with coaches, he had 16 coaches in 15 seasons, including 2 stints for Fuzzy Levain. Some names you might recognize on this list: Red Auerbach, who we mentioned earlier, Red Holzman, of course, later the Knicks coach and was and longtime Knicks scout before that. Alex Hannum, who led them to their only championship, 58. Slater Martin, great guard of the 50s. A lot of these guys were player coaches. Ed McCauley, Paul Seymour, Bob Pettit for just 6 games, did not like coaching. Harry Gallatin and Richie Guerin was actually there from 65 to 72. 65 is kind of when that all stabilized a couple years before they moved. And Phillips had replaced Alex Hannum, who led them to the championship the year before. So after leading them to the championship, he was sent away and brought in Handy Andy, who's one of the better guards in the early NBA. Led the league in assists for 3 years, led the Pistons to the 55 finals, and actually cost them the Game 7 with a costly turnover, and also played with the reserve for the Celtics in 57 and 58, battling against these very same Hawks in the finals. So from the book Full Court, The Untold Story of the St. Louis Hawks, Kerner parted ways with Hannum. I forget the particulars of why that was. I think it may have just been a money or respect type thing. They hired Phillip, who had not been a coach. So the things that were annoyed him were there was a shopping incident involving Phillip's wife that I forgot to look up the particular details of, but I think shopping incident covers it enough. Phillip also would schedule practice in the mornings based on the times that his wife wanted to make him breakfast. So
that seems fair. I mean, I don't see what's wrong with that.
I don't see what's wrong with that either. So they had lost. It all came to a head when they lost to a big game to Syracuse, 120-94 by a big score, and then the Marty Blake, who is a renowned scout and had like a early NBA figure around for a long time. He ended up suggesting that they fire him and make Ed McCauley their coach, which they did, even though they had to pay the astronomical $10,000 salary that Andy Phillip was making. Eventually, they brought in Ed McCauley, and things worked out pretty well. They finished that season 49-15, but the Hawks actually were upset in the division finals by the Lakers in Elgin Baylor's rookie season. However, the next year, 46-29, and they made the finals again, and they lost to the Celtics again, which they would do again in 61, although with a different coach at that point, because I guess McCauley was tired of being coach, or Ben Kerner was tired of McCauley, or whatever happened there. So a couple others that are that are among the short
updates on the Quad Cities, by the way, if you want.
Oh, the Quad. Okay,
just to set the record straight for a Quad City.
Okay, all right.
Davenport, Bettendorf, Rock Island, Moline, and East Moline. They're actually 5 cities now, but
5. Okay,
so it's very, very confusing.
Would that be the Quint? Would that be the Quint cities, or
I guess it's too confusing. They've made too many T-shirts, so but there you go. And as far as the Quad City DJs, and this is a quote here. It says, people get it confused. They are not Quad Cities DJs. They are 4 city DJs. So they are a quad of city DJs. Does that make sense? So there's 4 DJs that live in the city.
That just blew my mind, kind of, to be honest.
They're not the Quad Cities DJs. They're the Quad City DJs.
They are a quad of city DJs.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. So, mind blown. So there you go.
Yeah, that's...
So next time you give the Quad Cities credit for the Quad City DJs, remember, that's not what it is. So
yeah. Well, as I mentioned, my wife is from Iowa, and I often joke with her that the best thing that ever came from Iowa is the Quad City DJs.
And you weren't wrong until today, but now you
yes.
Now
I don't think
nothing good that came from Iowa. So
yeah, I'm lucky that she doesn't listen to this podcast, so she doesn't have to ever know that.
Except for your wife, of course, is one of the greatest things to come out of Iowa, if not the greatest.
I know that was implied, so I'm not going to be mad at you for saying that.
Yes, of course. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So, Yeah, so finishing up the coaches, Paul Westhead had started 7-4 with the 82 Lakers, but was feuding with Magic Johnson. We covered this all in a previous episode. That came to a head with Magic demanding a trade, although really understanding that they were just going to fire Paul Westhead, which they did. And Pat Riley took over, and everything was magical. Kevin McHale with the 2016 Rockets was fired after a 4-7 start. They were having issues with Dwight Howard and James Harden coexisting. I think Harden had shown up not in the best of shape. It did seem like Dwight was most of the problem here. However, once he was gone, the team was much better. Although Harden and McHale have had a recent war of words over Harden not being a great leader, and I believe Harden referred to McHale as a clown. So that relationship not terrific. I can kind of see both sides on that.
Yes,
one, to be
so
honest.
it seems like everybody just hated everybody. So that's good because I remember at the time it was all about that McHale and Harden were fine, but it was just that Dwight and McHale had a lot of issues, and then kind of a common trend with Dwight Howard. Right. But as time has gone on, it seems like it's a little bit of everybody. It's probably I'm sure McHale and Howard had their dust-ups, but Harden and McHale don't seem to be the best of friends either. So
no, not good pals. So. Yeah, McHale's not going to be there for Harden's Hall of Fame speech, and if he is, Harden will probably disparage him like Michael Jordan did with Jerry Krause.
Spend 3/4 of the time just bad mouthing, people in his past instead of
that'll be fun
instead of celebrating the moment. But it's fine.
Yeah, I wonder if Dwight Howard will be at James Harden's induction, or if Harden will be at Dwight's. I'm assuming both guys are Hall of Fame. Dwight,
you get a lot of hot takes with the Dwight, but it was funny. Like I think that was on Twitter the last week. I think a lot of people were talking about that, and it's like, you might kind of roll your eyes at Dwight, but Dwight Howard's a great player. I mean, he's had an incredible career. It's like obviously it's went down some weird paths, in the most recent years, and he's a guy that might not have the longevity that other people have. And man, that guy had a great career for like 10 years before it really went off the rails a little bit. But it's funny because people get really upset about it because in the moment he doesn't feel like a Hall of Famer, but man, you look at those numbers and they're Hall of Fame numbers, and he's got a Hall of Fame career, no doubt.
Right. Yeah. I mean, he's Defensive Player of the Year a bunch of times. MVP level player for a few years. That definitely
finals
is.
berth with him as the best player.
Right. I mean, the longevity because he has been not he's still kind of productive, but obviously his defense has fallen off and that kind of thing. And obviously all his teams hate him and always want to take him away. But you can't take away the great years he had with Orlando, even if that ended poorly.
Yeah.
So
no number of fart jokes will keep him out of the Hall of Fame. So.
No. So. We would never want it to be. So looking at the other shortest stints overall, not including interim coaches, as we mentioned, Ed Sadowski.
Any of the five are okay with me. So whatever.
Ed Sadowski.
Whichever one you want, Jason, you go with that. So.
Sadowski. 3-9 with the 1947 Toronto Huskies in the first BAE season, was a player coach and decided he'd just rather play, not coach. Bruce Hale started 4-13 with the 1949 Indianapolis Jets. I swear all these teams are real. He was not at the time, but would later be Rick Barry's father-in-law, and would coach him at the University of Miami. And it's University of Miami, not Miami University, not the one in Ohio, the one in Florida. And would also coach in the ABA, also to a really bad year in the ABA. Did not do well in professional leagues, but did better in college. John Givens in the first ABA season, 5-12 with the 1968 Kentucky Colonels. Albert Soar, 2-7 with the 1948 Providence Steamrollers. One of our Twitter followers is a big Providence Steamrollers fans, always gets excited whenever we bring the Steamrollers up. So here we go. Albert Soar, he actually was a fullback for the New York Giants from 1937 to 1946. Caught the game-winning touchdown pass in the 1938 NFL Championship game against the Packers at the Polo Grounds in New York, of course.
A game we've talked about many times in this podcast. Of course.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We're a big fan of that game, of course. And then in baseball was an umpire in the American League from 1950 to 1974. Was the first base umpire when Don Larson pitched his World Series perfect game in 1956. So
Albert
accomplished
Soar.
in all three sports. It really basketball's the worst of those by far. The other ones he did a lot better.
Life. That's a life.
Yeah,
man. That's an exhausting life. Just being everything like that.
He really soared, you might say.
It's Sportsman 101 right there. It's did it all. I mean, I do pine for those days when your former NBA coaches are umpires in baseball. But one day maybe again.
Yes.
But
yes. So next we have Jerry Tarkanian, the Shark, 9-11, starting off with the '93 San Antonio Spurs. Of course, he had a great college coach at UNLV, including the 1990 championship with Larry Johnson, Stacey Augmon, Greg Anthony. For the kids out there, man, that UNLV team was like really, really awesome and really like dominant and incredibly like kind of formative for their time. But he left UNLV amid some scandal soon after. Ended up with the Spurs. They had injuries to Willie Anderson and Terry Cummings, plus had lost Rod Strickland to Portland, so lacking some good point guard options there. Tarkanian had to use some not ideal lineups, including rookie forward Lloyd Sweepy Daniels in the backcourt. Daniels was actually a one-time UNLV protege whose college recruitment had added to Tarkanian's troubles with the NCAA, and then his academic problems and drug difficulties kept him playing in college. He actually did okay in San Antonio and carved himself a little role player career. There's actually a book about his life, or at least, he's kind of a playground legend before this. I don't know what the book actually covers for him, but there's a book about him that looks interesting. I've not had a chance to really dig into that one yet. But anyway, not a great situation. By the end of November, he was hospitalized briefly while suffering from chest pains. And then by in December, Dale Ellis and other players were complaining publicly about his tactics. Tarkanian actually sent a letter to the Spurs owner, Red McCombs, urging the acquisition of a point guard and arguing the team simply could not win without one. That ended up being the last straw. He was fired after that. Apparently, he eventually received a $1.3 million settlement from the Spurs, and he used that to fund a harassment lawsuit against the NCAA that he reportedly settled for $2.5 million in 1998. So really understands how to roll out those finances into bigger and bigger legal settlements. So impressive there. At the time, he said he was done with basketball, but he ended up at Fresno State in 1995 through 2002. John Lucas became the Spurs coach in 93. They finished the season 39-22, and they actually went to the second round, lost to the Suns in 6 games. The Suns went to the finals that year, so a fairly good year considering an inauspicious start.
Yeah, and he, obviously the NBA run didn't really work all that well, but his college runs always did. I mean, for various reasons, always did pretty well. But I remember even in Fresno State, they had a pretty good run as well. I don't know, obviously not the same run that they had UNLV, where
they went to the tournament a couple times.
Yeah, exactly.
Were solid,
Ray for Alston, a little skip to my Lou action in there. But not the dominant. I mean, UNLV, they were like a powerhouse.
They were amazing.
They were incredible, and they were just so athletic and nuts. But Fresno, I mean, he kind of resurrected them too, and then had some of the similar issues. But he's a man of maybe ahead of his game a little bit, and realizing the NCAA was a total joke, and who the hell cares? So
there's no question. Yeah, I mean, he had no problem gaming the system, but the system itself was pretty bad. So,
and one of the things that he always did too is, in terms of gaming the system a lot of ways, was taking guys that nobody wanted because they either had, drug, they had maybe issues, or they had, addiction issues, or they had maybe but like guys that weren't necessarily horrible guys with terrible criminals or whatever, but guys that maybe other programs wouldn't touch or whatever for, a number of different reasons or whatever. And, a lot of times, resurrect their careers. I mean, got a lot of guys. There were obviously some stories that weren't successful, but there were many that were as well under his watch. So in some way, he used them for his own personal gain, but in some way gave a lot of people a lot of second chances that might not have gotten it without him. That's
a very good point, Rich. So next we have Dave McMillan or Dave McMillan. There's a disagreement here. I think Basketball Reference is actually wrong in this case. But anyway, the 1950s.
I'm going to tell them. I'm at them.
Yes, the 1951 Tri-Cities Blackhawks, again, the Hawks Blackhawks franchise, 9-14 start. He was actually 64 when he became coach, which I think was unusually old for the NBA at the time. Usually it's younger coaches going on, at least in their 40s. He had been a longtime head coach at the University of Minnesota from the 20s to the late 40s. Actually succeeded Red Auerbach as Blackhawks coach. Only lasted less than a year there. Did not like Ben Kerner. They would later have some famous clashes when the Hawks and Celtics would later, battle in the finals. So fun times there. Bob Hopkins, with the 1978 Seattle Supersonics, began 5-17. He had been Bill Russell's assistant in Seattle from 75 to 77, then was actually his handpicked successor to take over in 78, was also his second cousin. The Sonics had a talented but unproven young core of Dennis Johnson, Gus Williams, Marvin Webster, and rookie Jack Sikma, along with veterans Fred Brown, Paul Silas, Slick Watts, kind of at the end of his career, and John Johnson. They dealt with lots of turnover in the previous year and some chemistry issues, especially in the last season. Maybe there's some hangover over that from the bad start. And Hopkins actually was like a pretty accomplished player and coach at Grambling. He actually scored the second most points in college basketball history. Also played for 4 years for the Nationals in the 50s. So he had some credentials also as a coach as well. But the Sonics brought in Lenny Wilkens and immediately helped turn the team around. They would make the finals in 78 and win a championship in 79. And Hopkins died in 2015 at age 80. But a few years ago, there was a article in the Seattle paper, and he talked about how the ownership really was mad about him drafting Jack Sikma. They wanted Ernie Grunfeld instead, who was a big prospect at Tennessee at the time. And then there was during Summer League, Sam Schulman, the owner, and some team officials wanted to come in and talk things over with Hopkins, and the meeting never took place because Moses Malone totally dominated Sikma, and team executives were enraged and looking for the door. Apparently Hopkins felt that they'd screwed up the franchise by getting Sikma, and then they waited until late November to make the move, bringing in Wilkens, and they turned around right away, won 12 of 13, and as we talked about, they would eventually make the finals. But I mean, the Sikma thing, he was right about. Obviously, Sikma ended up being a great player, and Grunfeld was there. I mean, he helped build the foundation of that team. It felt like he never really got the credit for doing that because he obviously helped to a certain extent. I mean, he was assistant coach with a lot of those guys and helping developing. It was probably another one of those situations obviously Wilkens was, I'm sure, the better coach for the franchise, but probably not a situation where Hopkins, they weren't as bad as they were under Hopkins. They just happened to be struggling, and then they turned around, and Wilkens was absolutely the right guy for that job. So a couple more fun ones. Don Delaney, 7-19. He actually was 3-8 to end the 1981 season for the Cleveland Cavaliers, and began the season 4-11 to begin the 82 season. So he got into coaching in sort of a strange way. This is the Ted Stepien of Cleveland Cavaliers. Yes,
my favorite.
Lots of fun. He was coaching the Cleveland Competitors professional softball team, which Stepien also owned.
All right, so I now it's obvious that you need to play softball. The path to NBA coaching is obviously
through softball.
There are many paths to take, but who knew that softball was one of the best paths to take? This is incredible.
Right. Maybe we
or be fullback for the 1939 Green Bay. I think it was. I forgot what team he played for, that one guy, but or you catch the winning pass to win the 1939 NFL championship.
Right. Maybe Psycho Sid Vicious of WCW wrestling fame could be could definitely. But anyway, so Delaney maybe thought he might get a job with the Cavs, but then Stepien said he wanted Delaney to be the team's general manager, and Delaney said, "You want me to do what?" This is from a Cleveland.com article when Delaney died in 2011. He was technically the GM apparently, but most of the personnel decisions were made by Stepien and Coach Bill Musselman, who we'll get to in a minute, has his own story. So eventually Delaney was named the new coach, replacing Musselman, but he actually still retained some front office duties. Then after that bad start in 82, Delaney was replaced by assistant coach Bob Kloppenberg, and then Chuck Daly was the coach for 41 games, went 9-32, and then Musselman came back, was 2-19 at the end there. So then Delaney returned to a front office role. It was a situation where the Cavs were not allowed to make trades without league approval during that time. They were later did the Stepien rule where you couldn't trade consecutive draft picks and all, and so forth. And eventually he was massaged out in 83, 84, and the guns were brought in to stabilize the team, and things got a little better after that. But probably not totally Don's fault, but obviously not a great situation for him.
No, maybe probably put in a situation that he probably should not have been in, considering he was coaching a softball team,
Yes.
Instead of the general manager for an NBA team or whatever. But that's
maybe not ideal.
Yeah, Stepien, man, we should do it. I would. I haven't read a book on Ted Stepien or something. That would be
Yeah.
incredible. He's the gift that keeps on giving, man. Like anytime you just wonder if is there anything else we can laugh at Ted Stepien about? There is. There always is.
Yes, there definitely is. And speaking about Musselman, so I believe his first pro job, he'd been a college coach, which we'll get into in a moment. So he was hired by the San Diego Sails, who started off 3-8 and then folded in the 76 season. Then 7 days later was hired by the Virginia Squires to coach, who replaced Matt Calvin, who was a player coach at the time. And then did some weird things, like played his starters entire 48 minutes, and it was a bad situation. The team was dealing with like not getting paid, and they basically the Squires somehow survived the year, and in fact folded weeks before the NBA merger, which theoretically maybe they could have gotten in on, although things were so bad, probably not. But anyway, he went 4-22 before he was replaced, and the Squires ended up having like 5 coaches that year, so a lot of crazy stuff. So then, as we talked about with Musselman, in addition to, the craziness that he's dealt with the Cavs and the Squires and the Sails, during his 4-year tenure at the University of Minnesota, 17 players quit the team complaining that he was too stern of a taskmaster, and his Minnesota years are probably best remembered for a 1972 brawl with Ohio State that led to the hospitalization of 3 players and the suspension of 2 others. Although this New York Times article notes that home attendance increased from 4,000 to 17,500, which apparently is the most important
draw.
thing.
I mean, hey, yeah, he's going with the fights. If we're not going to win basketball, we're going to fight. That's fine. Hey,
yeah. So in Virginia, he feuded with his players, like Tiki Bird and Johnny Newman, who were kind of the guys who were kind of flaky anyway, but also Jan van Berdikoff, who was kind of not really a guy who feuded with a lot of people. So yeah, not so good.
No, yeah, that's interesting.
And we got one more. John McClendon, the legendary, one of the great college coaches of all time, the first black pro coach in any sport, and was helped inspire the fast break, the full court press, the four corners offense, popularizing those things, or helping to invent them, helping inject pace into the college game in particular. He had a couple of coaching stints, pro coaching stints rather. The first one actually was with the Cleveland Pipers in 1962. He was the head coach of the ABL team that was owned by George Steinbrenner. Unfortunately, he ended up leaving halfway through the season. Whether he was quit or he was fired, there's some dispute about that. McClendon ended up being replaced as coach by Bill Sharman, who his team had folded, so he ended up being coach of the Pipers, and they ended up completing the season and winning the championship there without McClendon. So not a great situation for him in the pros. The second time around with the 1970 Denver Rockets. And unfortunately, Denver started out slowly that year. They were 9-19 early on in the season, despite having they had brought in Spencer Haywood from the just from 1 year in college. Of course, we've talked about Spencer Haywood, breaking the mold in terms of being an underclassman and so forth. And then as soon as Joe Belmont, a former ABA official, came in, they won 15 straight games and ended up 51-33 on an MVP season from Haywood, his only ABA year. They also had Larry Jones, Byron Beck, some of the better players that would stay throughout the ABA tenure. So not great pro experiences for him, despite all that he accomplished in the in basketball. Multiple time Hall of Famer, both as a contributor and as a coach. Not great experiences for him in the pros, unfortunately.
No, and I was going to mention that it's a pretty big distinction there. Is that he initially got into the Basketball Hall of Fame in 1979 as a contributor, as you mentioned, and then years later, 2007, many years later, was in a second time as a coaching for his coaching achievements, of course, because he'd been at a ton of schools and colleges. You had mentioned none of the Cleveland State was probably his biggest in terms of the NCAA, but it had done a lot with North Carolina Central University, Hampton University, Tennessee A&T, I think they're A&I rather. I think they're at Tennessee State right now, and then college, Kentucky State College, which is now university as well. So a lot of the older schools, a lot of predominantly black schools, historically black universities as well. And he was kind of one of the pioneers of a lot of those things, like you're saying, the full court press, the four corners offense, fast breaks, a lot of those things as well. So it's cool to finally see him get the double recognition there in the Hall of Fame as not just a contributor but also a coach.
Yeah, and he was mentored by James Naismith himself, I believe, and
Grew up
Paul
in
Gallen.
Kansas.
I mean, he had just. Right. Yeah. I only kind of really honestly know the surface of his story. Some of the basic stuff. I know he's one of the few predominantly college guys that I think would be fascinated to know more about, just because of how much he did to spread the game of basketball, and how influential he was in building programs in predominantly African American schools that later produced a lot of players that later made it into the pro leagues and helped revolutionize the NBA and pro basketball, and helped make it the fascinating, interesting, awesome game that it is today.
Yeah, and just a little bit of background on him as well. I mean, in terms of obviously he, as we said, he learned the intricacies of the game from Dr. Naismith or whatever. He was the athletic director, Dr. Naismith, at University of Kansas or whatever, Kansas University rather. McLennan, he couldn't play because they were a segregated team, so he still went there anyway. He transferred to the team knowing he couldn't play. And they would not suit up a black player until 1951, but he went there anyway just to learn under Dr. Naismith. It was just incredible to just say, yeah, I don't care that I'm not going to win. I'm going to a segregated school where you're not going to let me play, but I'm going to gain so much value for it. And obviously he spread that value for many years afterwards. But it just shows how far we've come, of course, in a segregated basketball team where a guy can't even play, couldn't even suit up. It's just incredible.
Yeah. All right, Rich. Well, this has been an interesting show. Lots of good. We dug in for some deep, deep dives into things here. So this was a lot of fun. I enjoyed this one. Thanks everyone for listening. You can find us at the Step Back at fansided.com. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher. We're also on Google Play now officially. Mm-hmm. So, what are you submitted us for some other ones, right?
TuneIn Radio. We should be on TuneIn Radio pretty soon as well. So anywhere you can possibly get podcasts, we'll be officially on very soon. So
okay, if there's somewhere where you listen to podcasts and we're not on there, and you would listen to us if we were on there, let us know. You can tweet us at Over and Back NBA, or we're also on Facebook, Over and Back NBA as well. So let us know, and we will be glad to submit our podcast and be on there for you, because we would like to be listened to if at all possible. If you would like to leave us a review on your favorite podcast service and 5-star rating, we would also be grateful for that. So thanks for listening. We're back again soon.